Well, welcome to this video, and I hope you like it. If you do, click the like button, hit subscribe, and share with a friend. Okay, this should be interesting here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the GMO crops again, and this one should be number 5. Numbers 3 and 4 are uploading right now. This one is on patents and the pros and cons and the arguments for and against, and this was a real weird one to research because you'll notice there's not a whole lot of links. That's because most of the stuff you find on this particular subject, I mean, like 9 out of 10 or more articles you find on this subject are over the top bias, one way or the other. First, there's a question that I don't think I really can provide an answer to. It's about the ethics of patenting genetically modified organisms to begin with. And that's not even just crops. There's other GMO technology out there. I mean, there's people trying to resurrect woolly mammoths. There's people trying to clone other things. There's people trying to do things as far as medical stuff with gene therapy. There's things all over the map here, but just there's an ethical question with patenting life to begin with on several levels. I mean, a lot of people have a religious argument. Even people who aren't religious, you know, myself, I don't consider myself very religious. I'm sort of somewhat agnostic. Just, you know, on some level, it seems too much like playing God to a lot of people. And that's, like I said, that's something I can't really answer. It's just something that people kind of need to think about. As far as patenting plants, that's been around since the 1930s. Actually, I believe it was 1930 itself where they allowed plants to be patented. And this was more or less somebody developing a new type of tomato or a new hybrid corn, or you know, a new color of rose or something like that. You could get a patent for that particular variety, being that it was something specific and unique and it had certain distinguishable qualities, and it was something that could be reproduced asexually, i.e. by cuttings or something. So you could have a certain cultivar of apple tree or whatever. And from there, you know, we eventually came to the 1980s, and in 1980 there was the ruling that you could patent a life form, basically. That's what started the whole biotechnology industry. And people argue that it, you know, it promotes the research and everything because people wouldn't invest the money to create these things if they couldn't get that patent and have that monopoly on that product and try to recoup their money. And for most products, that's, you know, more or less true, and that's a valid argument to some extent, although in a way, it kind of goes against some of the more altruistic Randian philosophies that people, they go into how, GMO crops are just for the betterment of mankind and going to improve the world and all that crap. It's like, if it's just for the betterment of mankind, why is, raking in money hand over fist the driving force there? So, then beyond plant patents, they call them utility patents, and those are what GMO companies normally get. They're not a plant patent. They're a patent on the genetic sequence, and specifically, without getting too lost in the weeds, it's a product called cDNA, complementary DNA, that is something that is man-made and not produced in nature. That's the part that they are claiming the patent on. Some of them, there's also patents on the techniques that they use to create some of these things. There's a lot of little layers in there, but in general, this is the patent that people are thinking of, these utility patents. And that's also, depending on the source, where they have the additional restrictions on duplicating it. After you buy one, you cannot duplicate it even for your own use, thus the no saving seeds. It's not like a normal plant patent. If you bought a special color of rose or whatever. Sorry about that. They're emptying the dumpster across the street. I'm not sure if the camera's picking it up or not, but that's the rattling in the background. But at any rate, like if you bought that, or a patented variety of apple tree, you could, take a cutting of that and make another one on your property and nobody cares. You couldn't do it for sale. You couldn't start taking cuttings and selling them, but you'd have some limited rights for reproduction, whereas with the GMO seeds having the utility patent, it has stricter guidelines. Patents normally work for 20 years. There's also another layer on top of the patents called a technology stewardship agreement, usually, which normally when these GMO companies are selling seeds, and I believe Monsanto pioneered this, the farmer has to sign a contract stating that he's not going to do certain things, such as, save the seeds and plant them again next year, or try to reverse engineer it or whatever. So that's another layer of legal protection that they are using. A big I guess I'll call it one of the rallying points of the anti-GMO community is a sort of a documentary, David versus Monsanto, about a Canadian farmer who was sued by Monsanto. And documentaries are made by people, and people have opinions, and often things are more biased than they let on. I did a whole thing about Disney and Wild Kingdom a little while back, and how they basically staged everything. And the same goes with this. The documentary paints this guy as this little poor woe is me farmer, but apparently one of the main reasons why he lost in court was because instead of just the saving seeds from the original there was some contamination. His neighbor was growing GMO, I believe it was canola. And he realized that his crop was contaminated with this Roundup Ready GMO crop. And he actually hit his fields with Roundup, which killed off the non-Roundup resistant stuff that he had planted. And then when he saved seed from almost entirely that contaminated portion that, you know, from blowing over cross-pollination, however it got there, from his neighbor's property. And he ended up, the seed that he replanted was in the high 90s, something like 98% the genetically modified crop, because the way that he had hit his crop with Roundup to eliminate the non-resistant plants skewed it that way. So yes, it was contamination from his neighbor's property, which is an issue in and of itself, but he was gaming the system to grow the GMO crop without paying for it, which is what came out in the court case, but is not represented in the documentary or, you know, a lot of the anti-GMO stuff. So, like most things, it's more complicated. The evils aren't quite as dark in a lot of cases, and in a lot of cases the you know, the benefits aren't as great, and that's kind of a thing throughout this. Yeah, the guy's name was Percy Schmeiser, I believe. And after this case, because there was so much negative publicity, Monsanto and most of the other GMO companies decided against suing anybody that had a low level of contamination. They officially stated it as like 1% or less contamination. I'm sure if it was something like 5%, they probably wouldn't bother with you either. Haven't been able to find a lot of data on that, but it was mainly because of the PR. Technically, by law, there is no exception for patent infringement if you're doing it by accident because of, you know, pollen blowing over from your neighbor's field or whatever. So that there would be no legal exemption for you if you did have some minute amount of contamination from your neighbor's property. You would still be legally liable. So that is an issue. Like I said, in reality, due to the PR, none of these companies are, you know, trying to go to that degree and go after people. But at the same time, people are still legally liable to something that's happening through no fault of their own. And also, as I said, the contamination itself is an issue because there are some people who just for whatever reason are never going to want to eat GMO food. And you can argue all you want about it being safe or whatever. Pork is safe to eat. Jews and Muslims don't eat it, and they'd be really pissed off if you were secretly feeding it to them without them knowing. So the same thing with the GMO crop. If people, for whatever reason, do not want to eat it, they should be able to exclude that from their diet. And as I said, the other problem is just, legally you're still responsible. And there's that axe hanging over your head that they may change that policy at any time if they feel that they want to. And, Monsanto was bought out by Bayer. Bayer is much more worried about their public image. Monsanto wrecked their PR the way they went about things in the past. That's part of why there is so much controversy and so much backlash, especially around this issue. See, the next thing on my list here is talking a little bit about research. And there are people on both sides of this too. It's kind of an odd thing, because people will talk about how there's basically an exemption, an undefined really exemption about doing research. And some have even said that, it actually promotes research, because if you file a patent, your patent has to detail what the hell you did. So somebody can read exactly what you did and then try to improve that patent or improve upon that process or whatever you patented, and then they can in turn patent that improvement. In reality, it seems like there is some cooperation with some of these companies and academic research. They consider it pure science, so somebody researching it just for the sake of science itself, not necessarily trying to make a competing product, maybe just testing the safety or whatever. They tend to allow that. But there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or a reason to it. Some researchers say, yeah, it's wide open. Other researchers say they have problems getting access to certain genetic material, because now that people can file patents that claim certain parts of certain gene sequences or something, there's only certain people who have those gene sequences, and they're holding on to them. So that's one that's kind of obscure to research, because I'm reading things, more or less academic things that are kind of stating it as being both ways, and it kind of varies. I guess different institutions have had different experiences with this. There is some universities are actually funded by some of these companies. Others are doing research that are not funded by these companies, but still seem to be given open access, and other institutions just don't seem to be given that access. So I'm not really sure all the ins and outs there. It was a little hard trying to go farther down that rabbit hole. There is a lot of concern about the control being concentrated in the seed producing industry. Part of it's driven by GMO crops. Part of it's driven by just everybody's, media companies, banks, everything's just trying to always merge and grow bigger and, gravitate towards, where there's basically a monopoly of, just a handful of large companies dominating the industry. And the top three seed companies, Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer, DuPont and Syngenta control more than half of the market. And those are all GMO companies. DuPont basically started out as a chemical company, same with Monsanto. So those three have a lot of control. There's supposedly some reduction in the availability of non-GMO crops, because part of these mergers, the big companies buy the smaller ones. The smaller ones may have a more diverse seed offering, but then they're making GMO versions of the other companies' seed offerings and spreading the, creating more GMO varieties, which sort of takes away some of the market from the non-GMO varieties. There seem to be some people who complain they can't find non-GMO versions of what they want. And there's other people who say that there are plenty of non-GMO options available. The GMO crops tend to be popular with farmers, so part of it might be that there's just not a lot of people looking for the non-GMO versions at this time. Certain crops, most of what's produced in the United States, up in the 80-90% range on corn, soybeans, and there was a third one, but I'm drawing a blank on it. But, 90% is GMO at this time. There are some patents that have expired, and now there are more or less, off-brand versions of the same seeds now. Most of these have been replaced by a new and improved version that is under patent by the main company. There's a Roundup Ready 2 that replaced the Roundup Ready soybean. There's a Roundup Ready 3 on the drawing board that's going to replace that. So even though the regular Roundup Ready has had the patent expire, the big corporations are usually on to the next version before that patent expires. There is also an issue with exports, because exports to China need the GMO crops need to have some sort of paperwork renewed every 3 years. That paperwork has to be renewed every 10 years for the European Union. And so far, Monsanto's been renewing on their patents and intend to do so until 2021. And like I said, Monsanto is part of Bayer now. That's a recent merger. But beyond that, will these smaller off-brand seed companies keep on renewing those patents? And considering that especially China, it buys like a quarter of all the soybeans coming out of the United States, so that's a huge chunk of the market. So if that isn't renewed, it could be an issue for all exports, because things get sort of cross-contaminated sometimes when things are being, loaded into railroad cars and put on boats and shipped over the ocean. Sometimes these things aren't cleaned out the best, and there might be some cross-contamination. So there's a little bit of worry that, if these companies don't spend the money to keep on filing that paperwork, it might gum up the whole system, which is kind of a weird thing. The other thing I didn't see detailed in any articles, but it's potentially a problem. As I mentioned, the big seed companies tend to have a new and improved version already coming out before that patent expires on the old version. And being that you're not supposed to replant the seeds, they can easily pull their former product off the market before that patent expires. Now, of course, it's not patented. Somebody else who has the ability to do it can recreate it, but it makes it much harder. The thing is, you know, from software to cars to everything else, everything's going towards a subscription-based society. You know, most companies are trying to move towards this, well, they want us to be little money printing machines for them anyway, but they're trying to get us to where we don't own anything, but we're paying to use it. That's the whole thing with some of these, you know, the new, what is it, Office 365 or whatever. You buy a subscription, but you never own the program. It's out there in the cloud somewhere. You know, you stop paying your subscription, it's just gone. And that's the way a lot of companies are trying to work towards. And that's something I see a danger of happening in the future with this. Going towards where they're locking farmers into more or less a subscription service. You pay us X per year and we'll keep giving you the latest and greatest version of our, you know, Roundup Ready, you know, soybeans or BT corn or whatever. You'll always have the latest variety. You can never save the seeds. You know, we own that. You just, you know, you're paying for this constantly. You ever stop paying, you have nothing. And like I said, a lot of companies are moving that way. And, you know, for the farmers out there who think I'm crazy, I've heard some things about some of your tractors. You're not allowed to work on them anymore. Buy a new tractor, got a problem with it, you got to call them up. You got to sign an agreement that the company you bought it from, or only their technicians are allowed to come out and work on it. So there's a lot of weird things like that out there, you know. And it's a patent issue there too with the tractors. They're saying, oh, you know, we don't want anybody messing with the tractors because, you know, we got this programming in there and the computers and stuff, and we don't want anybody trying to reverse engineer it or mess with it or whatever. But, you know, like I said, they're trying to move towards that subscription-based consumer base, where the consumers aren't really buying a product, they're just paying a subscription fee to use it. And the consumer never owns anything that they can walk away with. You know, their information stored in the cloud. They stop paying their monthly fee on renting that storage space on the cloud. All their pictures and all their files go away. So you kind of got them by the cojones. So, at any rate, I think I'm going to stop and leave it there. I think that's enough information. Like I said, most things are, like most things in life, it's more complicated than people on either side present it. The good isn't quite as good. The bad isn't quite as bad. And, you know, going back to the beginning, as far as the ethics itself, that's a personal decision that everybody's got to make on their own. Everybody's got a different viewpoint on that. You know, it's something our society really didn't have to deal with until the late 20th century, so we really have no history to fall back on as far as how to look at that. But at any rate, see you on the next one. Well, I hope you found that video informative. Hopefully it made you think, and please click the like button and subscribe if you haven't done that already, and check out the video that should be appearing somewhere around me here, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks.